Hey, Lake Point, Pastor Michael here to get you caught up on the fourth week of our series, All In. It's not just a series, but a defining moment in the life and history of our church. Throughout All In, we're journeying through the book of Nehemiah. We left off the story with Nehemiah doing cartwheels down the hallway of the king's palace. After 4 months of praying and planning and preparing, God gave him an opportunity to pitch his bold, audacious request to the king. And the king responded favorably to everything Nehemiah asked for. Now, fast forward a few months and Nehemiah is in Jerusalem. And for the first time, he is seeing with his own eyes what has been reported to him. No doubt he becomes emotional as he surveys the broken down walls and witnesses the extent of the damage for the very first time. And not just the damage, but the shame and insecurity it had brought to his people for the past 7 generations. After a few days of examining the situation, Nehemiah knows that the time has come for him to inform the people for the purpose of this trip. It's time to go public with his intentions. This is the moment that he had long been waiting for, and so he gathers all the Jewish leaders together, the priests, the nobles, the officials in one place, and he says to them, we read this in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 17, "You know very well what trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire." Now, as Pastor Nathan pointed out, notice how vision casting always begins with identifying a problem. And the problem was obvious. Jerusalem lay in ruins, its walls and gates destroyed by fire. But the people living in Jerusalem, they had grown so accustomed to the fact that the walls were torn down that they hardly noticed anymore. They had ceased to be concerned. They had learned to live with it. The inconveniences and the dangers it imposed had become part of their everyday lives. And over the years, they had lost sight of what could and should be true. Nehemiah's words were a wake-up call. In essence, he was saying, open your eyes, things are bad, we're in trouble here. His fresh set of eyes brought a new perspective, and without much prodding, the people of Jerusalem took note of their situation. They began to see their city through Nehemiah's eyes, and once that happened, they caught the vision. Now, here's the big thing that Nathan shared. Vision casting will always include an element of waking people out of their apathy. Vision casters rarely bring new information to the table. What they bring is an impassioned concern about an existing problem. They bring fresh eyes. Not only that, but they bring a solution, sometimes an obvious one, but with strong conviction. Look at what Nehemiah says next. He says, "Come, let us rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace." Surely to everyone listening, that had to sting. Nehemiah tried to soften the blow by including himself and saying we, but any way you cut it, this was a blow to their pride. Nehemiah was calling the people to face up to their reality. In essence, he was saying, we are an embarrassment, we're a disgrace, and we've allowed ourselves to continue in this state for over 100 years. Like, this is inexcusable. Somehow the people of Israel had been able to ignore what was evident to the surrounding nations. They had grown accustomed to their environment. Their national self-esteem had sunk to the point where they were content to live in a state of disgrace and dishonor. They had no national pride. But it was worse than that, because Nehemiah's words cut all the way through to their divine calling. They were not only an embarrassment and disgrace nationally, they were an embarrassment to God. Israel was not just another nation. They had been commissioned by God to be a light to the nations. Their role was unique among all the other nations. God had established Israel as the nation through which he would demonstrate his glory, his power, and his grace. He had chosen to reside and abide with them in a unique way by filling the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy of Holies with his glory. And through miraculous military victories, God had repeatedly proven to the surrounding nations that Israel's God was the one true living God. And that one day this nation would produce the Savior of mankind, through which all of the world would be blessed. But nobody would have guessed any of this by looking at the condition of their capital city. Jerusalem was a shadow of its former self. Nehemiah understood that God's reputation and glory were at stake. And he knew God wasn't finished with his chosen people. And so as Nate shared, Nehemiah's vision wasn't so much about rebuilding a wall as it was about reestablishing a people for God to demonstrate his power and fulfill his promises to the nations. Nehemiah's vision went beyond simply coming to the aid of a nation in trouble. His vision intersected with the providential hand of God in history. Nehemiah's challenge to the people that day was to embrace their God-given destiny as a people through whom God would eventually introduce the Savior of the world. You see, All divinely inspired visions are in some way tied into God's master plan. Whether it's loving your spouse or raising your kids or befriending and blessing your neighbor or maybe starting your own company. As a Christ follower, there is a larger, greater purpose for everything you do. Nehemiah understood this. He was able to connect the dots between his personal vision and God's master plan for the nations. And this is what made his vision so compelling. He was reminding Israel of the unique role God had destined them to play in God's master plan. Friends, we need to do the same because everything we do is linked to God's master plan for our world. As Pastor Nathan made clear, there's always a connection between what you have been called to do and what God is up to in history. And once you've made that connection, your vision will transcend mere circumstances. You won't simply be raising your kids, you will be raising up the next generation to make a difference in our world. You won't simply be holding your marriage together, you will be strengthening the fabric of society. You won't simply be growing your business, you'll be funding the Great Commission. You won't simply be pursuing a job or career, you will be gaining a place of strategic influence for the kingdom. You won't simply be helping with a ministry, you will be impacting lives for eternity. Nehemiah knew he wasn't just rebuilding a wall, he was participating in something so much bigger than that. And the same is true for you and I. Well, friends, thanks for listening. Enjoy jumping into discussion questions. Let's go all in.